to Hack Your Health with Dr. Nat, a transformative live stream TV show that brings wellness within everyone's reach. Each episode, featuring expert guests, delves into crucial topics like hormonal health, effective detoxification, and stress management through nervous system optimization. Gain practical insights into nutrition, supplementation, efficient workouts, and biohacking tools to enhance mental and physical health. So now, please welcome the host of Hack Your Health, Dr. Nat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hack Your Health with Dr. Nat. My name is Dr. Nathalie Beauchamp, and I am your host. The purpose of this show is to bring you tools, tips, and strategies about health that you can implement in your life daily and easily and make those habits stick. Today, I have a guest who is a good friend of mine. Her name is Kathy Ryan. And Kathy and I have known each other for quite some time, but one of the main reasons I have her on the show, she's just an awesome person to start with, but she recently published a book called, I have it right here on my iPad for people to see, The Context Eating Method for Women. And the subtitle, which is pretty catchy, actually, is How to Lose Weight Without Sucking All the Gluten, Chocolate, and Wine-Filled Joy from Your Life. Really, really catchy title. So the show today is going to be focusing on the book quite a bit because Kathy, as you will see, is talking about the foundational component of what her and her co-author called the context eating method. She's also going to talk to us about 4 major triggers, how to identify them and address them. And we're also going to cover a lot about mindset and mind shift, including some script for ourselves and so forth. So I'm looking really forward to this discussion. Hi, Kathy.
Hello, it's so great to see you again and to be here. Thanks for having me.
I think we're going to have a fun discussion. It's such an exciting topic in the sense that, it's giving people amazing resources. So, your bio, Kathy, you've been a nutritionist for 18 years now. You've worked with the likes of Lorna Vanderhaag, Dr. Maggie Wu, and you and I have done some work together as well. So we've known each other for quite some time, but I always like to ask my guests, tell us about your own health journey. How did you get to be who you are and do what you currently do?
Well, I feel like this is just a normal thing that happens with people is that who end up in this industry is that we're trying to heal ourselves, right? So my long and varied health history is just, I was a very sickly child and teen and even young adult. And from everything from, allergies and asthma and IBS and you name it, it was an issue for me. And it wasn't until I walked into a chiropractor's office where Dr. Nathalie was also practicing that this was the first time that someone had actually said, oh yeah, these are all related. No one had ever connected the dots for me with my health, that my asthma and my IBS and my allergies and my anxiety were all related. So when I understood that and when I started to get results from chiropractic care, that actually led me on a whole other journey of well-being. I actually ended up with pretty severe hormonal issues. And when I was 22, I actually started getting hot flashes and night sweats. And my friends were all laughing at me and saying, oh my goodness, she's getting hot flashes at 22. That's hilarious. Well, it ended up not being hilarious because I actually was in perimenopause at 22. And miraculously, I did manage to I was married and I did manage to have a baby at the age of 27. But by the time I was 29, I was in full menopause. So that led me on a whole other journey regarding hormones, because the only options I was given were things that literally were making me crazy. So anytime a doctor tried to put me on hormones, for like any kind of HRT, it really, really impacted my mental health. And my mental health was not really my biggest issue. So to have things get worse instead of better was not something I wanted to do. So I ended up doing a lot of my own, my own health journey, and now using what I've learned, I not only help myself but so many other people as well. So so that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. And you're so right to say, even when I interview, chiropractors or naturopath or anyone really that is on their health journey or is a natural health practitioner, oftentimes we had to figure things out for ourselves. And that's how often, on that path that we decide to make a career of that. So tell us why you wrote a book. And I know that, you and I spoke, was it last year? And you were talking about the book you were writing and so forth. So it's nice to see it finally come to fruition. So, with your expertise as a holistic nutritionist, as someone who had to figure out stuff for herself, but is also helping clients figure things out, I'm guessing that you had an urge to write the book to fill a void that you were seeing, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So way back in 2009, I really started, I don't know, it just was in me to try and find an alternative approach to weight loss for people, because I just see, the weight loss industry, it's a $4 billion plus industry that has actually ruined a lot of people's health. Because everything's an all or nothing strategy, right? You're on a diet or you're off a diet. You gain weight, you lose weight. There's all these different restrictions, and everyone's got the best approach for losing weight. And I was like, we have to come at this from a completely different way, because this is not working. So I wanted to give people, especially women, an alternative. And I wanted people to start thinking about food and their relationship to food, just in a different way. So it took a while. So, this was back in 2009. And we basically, so me and my co-author, Darpin, we created this context eating method. We didn't call it that at the time, but it had to go through a few iterations before we really felt like this was something that we wanted to put in a book. So that's kind of the background story of how we ended up with the context eating method.
Yeah, and I think when people hear that, like, I know for me, it makes me think of eating disorder, and I know you and I have had conversation on this before, disorder eating versus eating disorder, and I don't mind sharing that myself, that when I was a teenager at 14, I myself had eating disorder, and also part of my journey why I think I'm a doctor and I want to help people, because I too needed to find a solution. But I think you guys are looking at it in a different way, just even switching the order of this. And I think it's really brilliant to think about it that way. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah. So I have a very clear boundary as a nutritionist. So I don't tackle eating disorders. For me, they are more pathological, and they really do require a higher level of intervention and experience and things like that I don't have, that's outside of my scope of practice. So disordered eating is really, it's kind of a broad term that I use to just describe any disordered relationship that we have with food. So it can be anything from unhealthy eating habits that are leading people away from health, right? Or it can be these on again, off again approaches that we see all the time. But even things like really insatiable cravings that, where people they just want to binge on food all the time. Or the other one is morality-based eating. And this is something that I see a lot, right? So it's morality-based eating is, I'm good if I eat good food, and I'm bad if I eat bad food. So we place this whole extra layer of morality on our food choices, which, I mean, it just creates a whole other issue, right? With emotional eating and all kinds of stuff. So that's really how I differentiate disordered eating from eating disorder. So what we really focus on is the disordered eating.
So let's dig deeper then in what is context eating. This is not a term that, we hear all the time. So I'm looking forward to, for you to elaborate on it.
Yeah, so it's actually a term that I coined. It's basically, just like it sounds, context eating is about placing food back into its proper context in our lives. Okay, so when we think about where food is now in our society, it's everywhere, right? Like, where wouldn't you eat food apart from the bathroom? Okay, where would you not find food? I mean, it's everywhere. Whether we'll put food in almost any circumstance, and this is not traditionally how we as human beings have lived and evolved, to have this continuous access to food 24/7. So there are several aspects to context eating, which I will get into, but the gist of it is there are way more considerations to eating than just what we are eating. Okay, so all diets focus on two things: what you are eating and changing your habitual eating patterns, right? And that's basically it. Like, apart from intermittent fasting, that's a little bit more about when you eat, all we talk about is what you eat, and let's change those habitual eating habits. So what context eating does is it actually focuses on a lot more things. So we focus on who, what, when, where, and why. So we're adding context to the food you're eating. And so what this means is, instead of judging whether or not the food you're eating is good or bad, right? Because we get into, again, this morality based, oh, this food is good, this food is bad. We're focused on whether the context the food that is eaten in is good or bad. So let me just give you an example just to make this really clear. Okay. And I always use this example and people seem to resonate with it. So here's an example. Dr. Nathalie, is cake a good food or a bad food?
I'd say.
Right. Okay. So some people will say, most people will say, oh, it's a bad food. You can't eat cake when you're on a diet, right? And that's the truth. You generally can't eat cake when you're on a diet. And this is why people go off diets. But let me talk about cake in terms of context. So if you were sitting with a group of family members and it was somebody's birthday and you were all celebrating and you had a nice dinner and you're all sitting at a table together, is that a good context for having a slice of cake?
I'd say, yeah.
Yeah, right? What's not a good context is all that leftover cake that we take home with us, and it sits on the counter and it gets a little bit stale, but we're still eating it, and we're eating it over the sink when we, get up and wander around the house at 3:00 in the morning because we can't sleep or we're bored, and we end up eating this cake over the next 3 or 4 days, right? That's a bad context for eating cake in. So does that make sense to you? Good context and bad context, but the food is the same.
Yeah, no, it does. So would you say with your book that, and in the context eating methods, and I know you're focusing on women, but I'm guessing this goes to everyone. Are there people that you don't recommend this approach for?
Yeah, so there are some people that do very well with their health and well-being, being on these really restrictive diets. And if they're doing fine and they have no issues with that, then, keep doing what you're doing, because what this is not is a lose that last 10 pounds type program, right? So anyone who's like, ooh, this is the magic pill that's going to help me lose my last 10 pounds. That's not what this is. To lose your last 10 pounds involves a lot of math, right? It's very specific calculations of macros and calories and exercise and all this type of stuff. That's not at all what it is. It's not calorie restricted or portion restricted in the normal way a diet is. So it's not for people who are looking to get to a very specific number on the scale, or who, are obsessed with getting back into the jeans they wore in high school. Really, I wrote it specifically for peri and postmenopausal women, because that tends to be the client base that ends up showing up for me to help. But it is applicable to anyone. Anyone who wants to get off the diet roller coaster and manage their weight in a more holistic way. But the other population that it's really good for is even children, okay? And we can start instilling, when I get into some of the ideas of context eating, we can start instilling these ideas of context eating into our kids, because they learn from the ages of 2 and up that food belongs in every context, right? We give them Cheerios when they're in the car driving. We give them fishy crackers when they're watching TV. We give them, grapes when they're at the park. We just surround our kids with food constantly, and we haven't placed food into a context for them. So they grow up believing that food belongs in every context, and it doesn't. So not only is it good for peri and postmenopausal women, but it's actually really good for families.
Oh, such a great point for kids. So you're saying that there's 3 parts to the context eating. So you said, in the book, mindset, nutrition, and the context itself. So let's get granular here, and let's dig deeper into what you mean by those 3 areas.
Yeah, so mindset is a really big part of the program, and it really is foundational to the other areas, because we really do need to think, we need to change the way we think about food, and we need to become more cognizant of our unconscious scripts and what is fueling our need to overeat, right? And unconscious scripts, a lot of what we eat and when we eat and when we overeat is on autopilot, right? We're not even thinking about food. We're not even consciously thinking about what we should be eating. It's very mindless. So a lot of it is just becoming aware and interrupting those autopilot responses to food. And then I also talk a lot about empowering and disempowering beliefs. So when we say something, so I'll get clients talking to clients, and they'll be like, this is not my fault. My mother overfed me, or it's my genes, or it's this or that. And, I can't help it, and blah, blah, blah. And why that might feel good in the sense that it's like, well, it's not my fault, so I don't have to take the blame. But what that mentality actually does is it takes away your power to fix it as well, right? Mm-hmm. So it's only when we take 100% responsibility for our outcomes, no matter who we could potentially blame, our mother, the food industry, really what we're doing is we're putting ourselves back in the driver's seat, and we can steer our outcomes in a different direction. Does that make sense? If we say, oh, I can't help it, then there's no power in that. That's a very disempowering thought. Whereas if we say, you know what, this is my fault, but I know how to fix it, or I'm going to fix it, that is very empowering. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a society issue in general in a lot of things, right? That our self-responsibility is really decreasing, because we're constantly being bombarded by, it is not your fault, and you're working hard, and you deserve it, and so forth. And again, we're not going to get into politics per se, and societal issues in general, but it is something that we hear a lot more now than you and I did 20, 25 years ago. So I always think of what happens in society a bit like a pendulum. And, I think we're in the upswing of the pendulum, where self-responsibility is not at its highest. And I like what you're saying, that it's not about just taking the blame, but it's about, if you are acknowledging that you're responsible, then, as you say, you can take action. So this is definitely, a very good point. And about nutrition, because I always joke and I think you've heard me saying that we could put all of the nutritionists in, a stadium, and they probably would argue all day, except that greens are good for you. But even with this now, with the carnivore approach diet and so forth, I don't even know if they would agree on this, especially with people that have food sensitivity and lectin and all of that stuff. But point being that people are overwhelmed with nutrition advice. And I think, again, this is not something that was so readily available before. And also, that advice is often from commercials, right? Yeah. So we think often, I was just listening to a podcast with Dr. David Perlmutter, and he was talking about commercials and how people are thinking that they're getting their education, with these pieces of information. But at the end of the day, the food industry, the beauty industry, or they just want you to purchase the product. And I think you mentioned Cheerios earlier and so forth. And this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine when you have, let's say, the Diabetes Association endorsing products, then you're like, oh my goodness gracious, like it really should not be there. So all that to say, health and healthy eating is talked about all the time in different areas and by different people. So what is healthy eating in your context?
Yeah, so I apply a very general approach in the sense that, again, and we'll get into this a little bit more, really a lot of what you're eating will depend on who you are, right? So if you do have food sensitivities, and we'll get into that, there's things that you shouldn't be eating, or I'll get into that a little bit more. But my actual approach is, what I teach is that there are 4 different food groups, okay? So focus foods, and these are really nutrient dense, high fiber foods, superfoods. And these are the things that are going to help balance blood sugars and hormones and keep your digestion moving. Okay. So I have my clients base their meals around these superfoods. And that can be anything from, cruciferous vegetables to fermented foods like sauerkraut to superfoods like blueberries, the list goes on and on. So I give them a whole list of what I call focus foods. And then the next thing that they're to add to their meals are what I call satiating foods. So that includes your fats and proteins, right? So you start with your focus foods, then you add your fats and proteins. And then the third is the comfort foods. And so, of course, that's your carbs, right? And then from there, we also have what I call context foods. And these are foods that you need to relegate to certain contexts of your day, of your year, of your life, basically. They're not foods that we should be eating every single day. But the difference is, I don't tell people that they can't eat them at all, right? So if you're of the impression that this is going to be the last brownie you ever eat because you're going on a diet, that's the kind of on and off again approach that I want to get away from. So if you really love brownies, well, we would throw brownies into your context foods. And then I would help you decide, hey, when is a great context for having brownies, right? And there's lots of specifics I can get into on that. So those are my 4 features.
Yeah. And the third step in context, as I know you mentioned the chocolate cake example earlier, but can you flesh out a little bit more about that context, giving other scenarios and so forth?
Yeah. So this is kind of the secret sauce of the whole method, right? Because when we start asking questions around our food that are more than just what am I going to eat, everything changes. Okay. So if we have time, I'd love to go through each of the context areas so that you can see how they're either helpful to your eating habits or detrimental. That sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. So the first one is who. So who are you and who are you eating with? So are you a star athlete or are you a postmenopausal woman who walks less than 1,500 steps a day? Do you have celiac disease? All right. It's so funny because people see the title of my book and it says how to how to lose weight without sucking all the gluten, chocolate, and wine-filled joy from your life. And anyone who doesn't eat gluten, the first thing they love to tell me is, well, I can't eat gluten, and it's like, no, yes, if you're intolerant to gluten or you're celiac, no, you can't eat gluten. So I'm not telling you to eat gluten, right? But they always love to make sure that I know that they can't eat gluten. So of course, if you have celiac disease, you're not going to be eating gluten. So that's sort of who you are, right? Are you fit? Are you not fit? Are you sick? Are you healthy? These things will all determine, to a certain extent, your own context. But then we also have, who are you eating with? So one of the examples that I love to give is, Dr. Nathalie, if you were sitting at a nice restaurant eating with some business associates, would you ever feel, I know you probably don't get this craving anyways, but would you ever feel the need to like haul out a pint of Haagen-Dazs and start eating it with a spoon right in the middle of your business meeting? No, exactly, right? So, and even for people who struggle with what, they love their Haagen-Dazs, they love their pint of Haagen-Dazs, that particular context of meeting with business people actually places a barrier around their food choices. Haagen-Dazs is not going to be introduced into that food situation. So you can see we can start using these situations to our advantage. A disadvantage would be something like, all your coworkers that have a birthday. There's always a birthday at work. Every other day there's a birthday. Or somebody is always bringing donuts into the workplace, right? And you're constantly having to deal with these donuts. Well, that's a context that you're going to have to deal with, because that's a very specific situational context where it's going to be more difficult for you to stay away from donuts, okay, just because they're there. So we have both barriers to our food, depending on who we're eating with, and also like potential problems with our food, okay, depending on who we're eating with, right? Like if you're eating with,
you're making me, sorry, there's a bit of delay. You're making me think of a client who is retired. Her and her husband are boating, so they're constantly entertaining and so forth. And I mean, health is a huge priority to her, but she is really struggling into the context of always hosting people, and there's alcohol involved and food that, you would not normally eat all the time, but for her somehow it is, what is happening in her own life. So that's a practical example for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's some of the exact context that my clients will run into issues with, that we have to help them work through. But that's where we get into some of the other reasons, right? So the next number 2 is what, right? What am I eating? All diets focus on that. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, because there's a whole bunch of ways you can go with that. But the next one is when. When are you eating? Is it 7 o'clock in the morning? Or is it 11 o'clock at night? Or is it 3 in the morning, right? So there might be something that's good and healthy to have at 7 in the morning, but maybe not 3 in the morning or at 11 p.m. Other things that we can consider with when is it spring? Is it summer? Is it winter? Can I enjoy an ice cream cone with my family in the middle of summer, but not bring ice cream into the house in the middle of winter, right? These are kind of some of the things that just get you thinking. Ice cream belongs on a hot day surrounded by my family, and we go and we have an ice cream cone, but I'm not going to bring a pint of ice cream into my house in January. Mm-hmm. Is it Christmas time? Is it barbecue season, right? There's very specific foods that show up around Christmas time that we don't have the rest of the year. So at Christmas time, would it make more sense, if you did want to indulge, would you indulge in, say, a Tim Hortons donut around Christmas time? Or would you maybe have some homemade baking that your mother made that only shows up for these 2 weeks of the year, right? So again, there's that when context.
So
with
let's
where.
take a quick break here. So we covered the who, the what, and the when. Let's take a brief pause, and we'll come back to talk about the where and the why.
In today's world, the flood of health information feels endless. But amidst the noise, two experts with over 50 years of combined clinical experience come together to help you with Smart Cuts, biohack your health span, cutting-edge protocols for greater energy and performance. Dr. Paul Sly, a beacon for athletes, weekend warriors, and those seeking to elevate their potential. And Dr. Nathalie Beauchamp, renowned for empowering individuals in their health journeys. Together, they've produced the book, Smart Cuts, Biohack Your Health Span, a protocol-based treasure trove packed with actionable steps. Journey through 5 transformative sections. Dive into sleep, hydration, movement, brain health, and even the secrets of longevity. Guided by their expert hands, unleash the best version of yourself. With over half a century of clinical wisdom and innovative protocols, reclaim your health and redefine your limits. Are you ready to embark on this transformative journey? Smart Cuts, available now.
Excellent. Welcome back. So Kathy, let's talk about now, we've done the when, let's talk about the where in the context eating method that we should be focusing on.
Yeah. So the where is, are you in a fancy restaurant or are you sitting on a couch at home? And kind of like we alluded to before, opening a bag of chips in the middle of a fancy restaurant is not going to be something that you're tempted to do. Whereas when you're sitting at home on a couch, that might be something that you're tempted to do, right? Another thing is, are you eating at a table? Are you eating at a table or are you eating in the car? So where really is a big thing that I really try and get my clients to focus on, because if we can get people back to eating at a table, that's the best place for food, right? Is at a table. And what that does is, if you say I'm only going to eat at a table, that means that if you want to have that bag of chips, this is what I tell my clients. If you want to have that bag of chips, go ahead and eat it, but you have to eat it sitting at a table. And what they find is that they have to make a choice, right? Am I going to sit and watch my TV show, or am I going to eat my bag of chips? And they're like, well, I don't want to go sit at the table and eat a bag of chips. So then they don't eat the chips and they just continue watching their show. And then their grocery habits start to change as a result of that, because they're like, well, I don't want to sit at a table and eat a chocolate bar. I don't want to sit at a table and whatever, eat a popsicle, a pint of ice cream, whatever it is. I'd rather I'd rather eat it in some of these other less healthy contexts. And so what we're doing is we're breaking the habit. We're breaking the food and the place connection. And it makes it much easier for people to place food back into its proper context. And then of course,
you're making me think too, is we talked about kids earlier, and kids will mimic our behavior, and I think it's not easy. And I know I have friends that have young kids, and off after school and soccer this and hockey this, and okay, dad, you go with one, and like, I know it's not easy, but even having a few meals during the week that you're like, no, we're all sitting at the table, and it's teaching our kids, like you said, to put things in context, but also that food needs to be, that there's a behavior that goes with it that is healthier for us than all of us, eating in separate rooms and not communicating, and that bond with eating and discussing our days and so forth. So that even anchors proper behavior even deeper, I think.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because for me, if we all just got back to eating at a table, that would fix our obesity problem. Because when you think about, like, going back to the 1940s, you ate breakfast at a table, you ate lunch at a table, and you ate dinner at a table. And you probably didn't eat very much of anything between those meals. It was very structured. And because food wasn't everywhere, right? You weren't getting in the car and driving to Starbucks and on your way to the grocery store, picking up a 500 calorie snack, right?
Yeah.
It just didn't happen. And I think there was a societal structure that existed then that we don't have now. And I believe that is one of the biggest reasons why the obesity epidemic is so bad. It's just really all about context. And then of course we have why. So that's the final question. Why are you eating? Are you hungry? Are you bored? Are you stressed? Are you tired? Are you celebrating? Are you lonely? Like, there's so many reasons that we eat now that have nothing to do with being hungry. And I have no problem with people eating when they're celebrating either, but some of the contexts that we try to avoid are eating because I'm sad, eating because I'm stressed, eating because I'm lonely, eating because, the food is filling some kind of gap. So we can kind of see the natural boundaries that situations and people can place on our ability to eat healthy or not. And really, it's up to you. Like, only you can decide what's good or bad food context for yourself. That's not up to me or you or anybody else to decide for you. That's up to you.
Yeah. And I think, like anything in life, it's being aware first, and then, the why of this, but also in the bigger context of, it's not just about losing weight. It's not just about looking a certain way. It's about being healthy, right? So that, to me, especially as we age, just had this conversation with a friend today, that, aging is, I'm starting to see it as a privilege, right? Aging is a good thing. But it's also the things that we do now are more for us to be healthy and live longer and have all our faculty doing so, because you're seeing people that are sick, and I'm not saying that it won't happen if you lead a perfect lifestyle. There's no such thing. But to me, it's putting it in the context of just being healthy, and having energy, and being able to do what you want to do during your day. You're just going to be a better person. You're going to be a better parent. You're going to be a better spouse, and so forth. So putting things in the context that food is fuel and is a tool, but it's not the all and be all. And I go back to the commercial. We're constantly bombarded with that kind of information. So it is harder and harder, because back in the days we didn't have this information. And I say commercials, but I'm just not referring just to television. I'm talking about our phone and Instagram and YouTube and all of that stuff. So I think even harder now, potentially, to disconnect and not be influenced as much. So I guess what I'm saying is, having a strong why and being able to understand our why can only solidify for us to have better habits and behavior, right?
Absolutely. And I love that you went to awareness, because that's really the crux of it, right? Is I want to bring awareness, because what this can also show people is areas of their life that are just out of balance. I mean, if you're eating in the car every night because you've got a hockey practice or a piano practice or a skating practice or taekwondo practice, and you're just constantly running, and you're never home, and you're never eating at a table, and again, it's not a judgment. It's just, this is something different that we didn't used to do a number of years ago, decades ago, right? We were at home, we were eating at a table. So this is actually getting people to start looking at some of the areas where food is out of balance and out of context in their life, has actually helped them make some other choices for their family, where it's like, well, maybe we don't need to be out every night of the week. Maybe there are things that we need to pull back on a little bit. And this has helped bring, it's improved relationships, it's improved stress levels. Like it's all holistic, right? So that's why I love it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So you also talk in the book about food-related triggers. Can you explain what you mean by that and what those triggers are? Because again, if we know better, we do better, right?
Yeah. So I love talking about triggers, because managing these triggers is actually the key to everything. So what's interesting about every single diet out there is that they want you to change your habits, right? It sounds great. We want to change your habits. But what I do with context eating is a little bit different. So I say that there are 4 main triggers to overeating. And the first one that is never talked about and never dealt with other diets is the physiological triggers. Okay, so this is where your body is actually needing something, needing some form of nutrition that it's not getting. Okay, so typically it's good fat, right? So if someone comes to me and they say they have a lot of cravings can be a result of a number of different things, but if they say they have a lot of cravings for what they call carbs, okay, they'll say, oh, I have insane carb cravings. When I dig into it a little bit more with them, we find out that actually what they're actually craving is fat, because a lot of the foods that we eat that are carby are also have a lot of fat. And fat is required for every cell in your body, for the cellular membrane and hormones and cholesterol and all this other good stuff. And so if we don't give our bodies enough good fat, it's going to go looking for fat. It doesn't matter what the source is. It just needs fat. So when you think of chips or hamburger or pizza or a lot of these things that people associate with, oh, I crave carbs, there's actually a lot of fat in those things too. So people crave things based on something going on with their physiology. So if we can provide the body what it needs so that it doesn't go looking for fat and it doesn't go looking for salt and it doesn't go looking for magnesium and those types of things, that's the first step. And that makes getting rid of the habits a lot easier. I don't know if you have any comment on that before I go into the next one.
No, makes sense.
All right. So the next trigger is actually emotional, and this makes a lot of sense as well. We have emotional triggers to food. So one of the ones that I always talk about is my mom made the best chocolate chip cookies when we were kids. And we didn't have a lot of treats growing up. We actually had pretty good food context growing up, but her chocolate chip cookies were the best. And that's when, we'd get a scoop of the raw dough and we were allowed to help. And there was a lot of really good emotions with those chocolate chip cookies. So even now, my mom still loves to make chocolate chip cookies. And if I were to bring those home with me instead of just having one or two when I'm, out visiting her, I would eat those chocolate chip cookies. I would probably have, 6 or 10 or 12 in the space of 24 hours or so, because it just brings back these really good memories for me. So I have to place this barrier between me and those chocolate chip cookies and say, chocolate chip cookies only happen when we're visiting with mom. So that's just an example of an emotional attachment to food. And I mean, the emotional attachments can be endless, right? And then we talk about situational triggers for food. So these are things like, I'm sure everybody's done this, where you go out to a breakfast buffet and you pay $25, $30, $40 for a breakfast buffet. And then you're like, I got to get my money's worth out of this breakfast buffet. So, and you load up your plate and you know that you're full and you don't need any more and you're satiated, but you've got to get your money's worth with this breakfast buffet, right? So there's a lot of these types of situational triggers that we run into that can cause us to overeat. And that's just one example. And then finally, we get to the habitual triggers. And the habitual triggers are just that, they're habits, right? So that's when we get into our car and we're going to go run some errands and we have to stop at the Starbucks drive-thru. It's just something we do. Or on our way to work in the morning, on our commute to work, we're stopping at Tim Hortons and we're getting a coffee and a breakfast sandwich or a donut or something like that. And these are those autopilot habits that I talked about right at the beginning that can really, unless we sort of go, wow, yeah, I am doing that every day. And do I need to get that Starbucks drink every day? Do I need to get that donut every day? No, you don't, right? But until we sort of, again, bring that into our awareness, it remains hidden, and we may just do it mindlessly and on autopilot. It's the same as, I don't know if you've ever had this happen where you take your normal drive to work, right? But on this particular morning, you have to stop off and drop something off at a friend's house, and it's a little bit out of your way from what you would normally drive, the way you normally would drive to work. Well, unless you're consciously reminding yourself every few seconds that you have to go and drop this thing off at your friend's house, you'll be at work on autopilot, right? Driving on autopilot so easily, because that's just how we're built. That's just how we function. We do a lot of our actions on autopilot, and eating is the same. So there's always some overlap between them, but really there's a pretty good distinction between physiological, emotional, situational, and habitual.
Yeah. And having written a book called Hack Your Health Habit, I know all about habits. And, it is, you're right, one part of the component. And again, I go back to the awareness that sometime we start doing something and you're like, since when did I start doing this behavior? And the next thing you know, it has become habitual and you're expecting it and so forth. So it just, it's to be able to realize this and then say, okay, what can I do to change this and put it in a different context? And I love, the thought of saying, okay, this habit, which let's say I've developed, I don't like, okay, let's not take it away completely because I enjoy, let's say, a square of chocolate or so forth, but I don't need to have it every night. If it has become a habit, then I'm like, you know what? Don't need to do this. And same thing for some people with a glass of wine. They really enjoy a glass of wine. And it's happened to me, several years ago. I enjoy a glass of red wine. And then before we knew it, we were potentially drinking a glass of wine 2, 3, 4 nights a week. And my husband and I said, whoa, hold on a minute. We know this is not good for our health. So how can we change that habit, put it more in the proper situation and context? But you sometimes need to be a certain level to say, okay, hold on a second. This is getting a little bit out of hand, right?
Yeah, and that's a perfect. So basically, context eating, some of us do it already, right? Like we'll say things like, we're going to have pizza night on Friday night, right, with the family. That's pizza night, and that's the only time that you eat pizza. So we do this context eating a little bit already, and that's why it actually makes sense to so many people, because they're like, oh, okay, well, if I can do that with pizza, then I can do that with anything. And it really is. And what this does is it doesn't, diets restrict you and they deny you. What context eating does is it actually up levels your food experience, because you are fully immersed in the experience of eating that thing when it's in the right context.
Yeah. This is such a good point, because when I start working with people, I always try to add things to their nutrition, like more fats, more good fats and protein and stuff like that, as opposed to retrieving something that's really important to them, because no one likes to have something completely taken away. I know there's context to that if somebody has food sensitivity and so forth, but in general, again, it's not that all or nothing that we need to do. So can you go into what each of these triggers look like for those for context?
Yeah, so I think I mostly covered that, because like I said, there is some overlap between them, but really what we're doing is we're talking about supporting the physiological needs of the body. So that's with food and with supplements. Emotional is these good or bad emotions either lead us to good choices for food or bad choices for food. Situational, we talked about the breakfast bar or the breakfast buffet. And then, but what I want to focus in is, this is why habitual is the last place that we should try to start if we're trying to change our food, change the way that we're eating, right? Until we address the physiological needs of the body, we address our emotional responses to food, and then really start controlling our situations or being more aware of our situations, our situational food experiences, and where we're going to run into trouble. The habitual is very hard to do. But if we take care of those three things first, habitual actually just falls into place, and it's much easier.
Yeah, I love that, Kathy. Actually, that is really, really good, because habitual is hard, right? Like habitual is that habits, all that habits die hard, just like we the saying. So it's, by God, we have to kind of wrap up. So can you leave us with 5 of your best tip that someone can use to get started with the context eating method?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's much broader than this, but these are my best 5 tips to get you started. Number 1 is move your food to a table. So always eat at a table. Always eat at a table. I don't care if it's a chocolate bar or a plate of spaghetti or whatever it is you're choosing to eat it at a table, and see even how that changes your food experience and your choices. Number 2 is, if you're going to have a sweets, so if you're going to have anything with sugar in it, it's a dessert, it's not a snack. So no more muffins and granola bars and high sugar protein shakes or anything like that as snacks. If you want something sweet, it goes at the end of a meal. The third thing is, it ties into that. Blood sugar balancing is key. So combining your foods by making sure that you're having satiating foods like fat, protein, and fiber, and you combine that and then make your carb portion smaller. Number 4, increase your hydration. There's a whole mindset component to hydration that I talk about in the context eating method that we don't have time to get into here, but hydration and proper hydration is actually a mindset component. And if you can master that habit, you can master a lot of other things. And then the 5th thing is consider supplementation. So again, we want to meet the physiological needs of our body. So this would be things like making sure that you're getting enough good, healthy fats, okay? Making sure that you're getting something like magnesium if you've got these chocolate cravings. I mean, there's a bunch of things, right? There's protein. There's some really foundational things that you can do for supplementation that will help, that are not actual weight loss supplements, right? They're actual foundational food supplements that will help you lose weight the right way. But if you are looking more for something more specific in terms of an actual supplement to help with either blood sugar balancing and weight overall, something like berberine is really, really helpful. I've heard it called nature's Ozempic, and I agree. Like there's a real place for berberine for people who really struggle with cravings and blood sugar balancing. And then the final thing, which is a little bit newer, I don't know if you know much about this, Dr. Nathalie, but Akkermansia probiotic. So Akkermansia is actually a probiotic that we can measure. We can measure the amount of Akkermansia in the gut and in a stool sample. And it's people who have low amounts of Akkermansia that are more likely to be overweight or have blood sugar issues. So now we can actually recolonize the gut with Akkermansia. So that's a fabulous probiotic. I love to use that. And so those are my 5 tips.
Yeah, and to go with the Akkermansia, I've been listening to many podcasts throughout the last few years, and I know Drew Purwitt talks about Akkermansia all the time, and he has guests, and it really caught my attention in terms of obesity, and because we know, you and I know how important the microbiome is. So Kathy, thank you so much for all of this information. So where can people find you? I know I purchased the book from Amazon, and you also, you ladies have also a website that people can go to, correct?
Yeah, so our website is contexteatingmethod.com, and there is a link right at the top of that page where you can get my triggered eating inventory. So this basically will tell you, is your overeating more likely to because you have physiological cravings, emotional, situational, or habitual. What is the problem? So that is a little quiz that you can grab there on the website, and it'll give you some insight into what's going on with you.
So it's contexteatingmethod.com where people can find that, and the book on Amazon as well. And just before we wrap up, holistic nutritionist is a profession that is known and not completely well known. And I know that you work directly with clients. So just take a few minutes to tell us, what is your approach, especially now that you've written this book, compared to how you used to approach your clients. So I'm sure you probably have integrated a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And I tend to work more with groups of clients now, especially when it comes to weight loss, because I find that group environment is extremely supportive. There's a community support aspect to it. And it really just, it solidifies everything that everybody is learning when you hear other people asking questions, and everybody's on the same journey together. So I don't work with a lot of people on an individual basis, some, but really it is more the group coaching that I do now.
Yeah, and there is a lot of practitioners that are shifting to the group, coaching and work, because you're right, that having that community and that support, and oftentimes, people can exchange resources and listen to each other and say, oh yeah, I'm feeling this way, and so forth. So kudos to you to be able to integrate that, because I think it just supports what you do even more so. So thank you so much, Kathy. It was really amazing to review your book, and also the fact that you were able to write this book and publish it. I know this is a feat on its own for anyone who has written books. It's not always an easy process, but it feels good once we're done. So thank you so much. So this was Dr. Nathalie Beauchamp for the show Hack Your Health with Dr. Nat. I hope that you enjoyed today's show. I know it made me reflect on some of my behavior, and hopefully you'll get a copy of the book to dig deeper into it, because at the end of the day, our behavior and everything that we talked about is so important. It's not just what we are eating and counting calories. The context surely does matter. So until next time, we will see you at the next show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Dr. Nathalie's 7-Day Hack Your Health Challenge. Transform your fitness level with 7 quick, do them from anywhere workouts. Look and feel great. Nutrition. Master the art of optimizing your diet and maximizing nutrient intake with daily nutrition challenges. Biohacking. Unlock exclusive content to tap into your body's innate wisdom. Take on challenges to optimize your mindset and physiology. Ready to transform your health? Visit www.drnat.life to join Dr. Nathalie's 7-Day Hack Your Health Challenge. Your journey begins now.
This has been Hack Your Health with Dr. Nat. Tune in each week and uncover simple yet powerful strategies and actionable steps to elevate your health and wellness.